Before Delta Force had a name and before special mission units were formally defined, the U.S. Army ran an early experiment in Vietnam. It was quiet, it was improvised, and it was never meant to be famous. It was called Project Delta. Project Delta was a deep reconnaissance and limited strike program used by MassEV and operated by the U.S. Army Special Forces. The unit was designated Detachment B-52, part of the 5th Special Forces Group. Operating primarily out of Nha Trang, Project Delta expanded rapidly between 1965 and 1967, focusing on deep reconnaissance, target acquisition, prisoner snatch operations, and intelligence collection in areas where U.S. forces were not yet operating regularly. This was the early phase before formal doctrine, before standardized procedures, but not before clear ideas began to form. At first glance, Project Delta can look very similar to LRRP or other reconnaissance units operating in Vietnam. That impression is understandable. Project Delta was never designed to look different. There was no standard uniform, no identifying insignia, and no visual signature meant to set them apart. The difference was not visual, it was operational. LRRP teams scouted terrain in support of units already committed to combat. Project Delta often operated earlier, sometimes before a campaign had even been approved, to determine whether an area was worth committing major forces at all. Because Project Delta had no visual identity, their equipment tells the story more clearly than appearance ever could. This was not a loadout designed to win firefights. It was designed to move quietly, operate far from support, and return with information that shaped decisions at higher levels. Item 1, XM16E1/M16. For Project Delta, the XM16E1 was not a rifle intended for holding terrain or fighting extended engagements. It was selected because it was relatively lightweight, controllable, and effective at the distances most reconnaissance teams operated within. Equally important, it allowed teams to carry sufficient ammunition without excessive weight during long movements through jungle terrain. In deep reconnaissance, firepower served a very limited role. It existed to break contact, create separation, and enable withdrawal. If a Delta team was forced into a prolonged firefight, the mission had already failed. Item 2, CAR 15/XM177, late phase. By 1966 and 1967, some Project Delta teams began carrying the CAR 15. This shift was not driven by a need for greater firepower, but by the requirement for improved mobility. The shorter barrel and reduced overall length made the weapon easier to handle in dense jungle, particularly when crawling, climbing, or changing direction under pressure. It reduced fatigue and interference during long patrols. The CAR 15 reflected a clear operational priority within Project Delta. Mobility mattered more than range, and speed mattered more than fire superiority. Item 3, M1911A1. The M1911A1 served as a last resort weapon. It was not carried for combat, but for survival in extremely close-range encounters. In deep reconnaissance operations, drawing a sidearm usually meant that the situation had already deteriorated. It existed as a final safeguard, not as a primary fighting tool. Item 4, Jungle Clothing, OD Green and Tiger Stripe. Project Delta had no standard uniform. Plain olive drab jungle fatigues were common, particularly when operating alongside indigenous forces. Tiger stripe uniforms appeared when improved camouflage was required, but they were never official issue. They were locally acquired and used according to mission needs. Clothing was selected to avoid recognition, not to create it. Appearance was a matter of practicality, not identity. Item 5, M1956, load-carrying equipment. There was no standard configuration for load-carrying equipment. Each team assembled its gear based on mission requirements. Anything that did not directly contribute to mobility, survival, or extraction was left behind. The load was kept as light and flexible as possible. There was no correct setup, only what worked. Item 6, PRC-25, radio was the most critical piece of equipment carried by Project Delta teams. Without it, a team was effectively isolated. The radio enabled communication with aircraft, coordination of extraction, and real-time reporting of enemy activity. Every mission depended on maintaining contact beyond the team itself. For Project Delta, communication was not support, it was the mission. Item 7, M18, smoke grenade. Smoke grenades were not offensive tools. They were used to mark positions, screen movement, and coordinate extraction. In dense jungle terrain, visibility was limited. A single smoke grenade used at the right moment could determine whether a team was recovered or lost. Item 8, M26, fragmentation grenade. Fragmentation grenades were carried, but used sparingly. They were not intended to win engagements. Their purpose was to create a brief window of opportunity, a few seconds to break contact and withdraw. Time, not destruction, was the objective. Item 9, Boonie hat. The Boonie hat was a practical choice for long operations in jungle environments. Lightweight and breathable, it offered protection from sun and rain without restricting movement. It was not a symbol or a marker of status. It was simply functional equipment, chosen because it worked. Project Delta did not last long as a named program, but the ideas it tested proved durable. Small teams operating deep beyond friendly lines, flexible equipment tailored to mission needs, and a focus on information over firepower. Before special mission units had well-known names, this was where that way of thinking began.